Hi, I'm Dr. Ellis Orozco, and thanks for listening to this video podcast. I hope you have a great weekend. Welcome, and thanks for listening in to this weekend podcast. I wanted to begin this weekend by just expressing my condolences to the Sherrard family. David Sherrard was a police officer here in Richardson who lost his life last night in the line of duty. And so our hearts and our prayers go out to the Sherrard family today. Jesus in one place says, "No greater love hath a man than this, than he give his life for his friends." And Officer Sherrard certainly did that last night. He gave his life protecting this community. It really got me to thinking about this idea of devotion. Jesus says that the full measure of devotion is giving your life over. And so I wanted you to reflect this weekend on what it means to be devoted to God, to be devoted to Jesus. I think our concepts of devotion are kind of shifting in our culture and our society. There's this one place in the scripture where Jesus has been teaching around the Sea of Galilee, and the crowds are coming out to see him. His fame is growing as a teacher and a preacher and a healer, a miracle worker. And the crowds are pressing in on him, and he teaches them at this one place, and he ends the sermon with a parable. That's a story that's meant to teach. It's a parable about a farmer who goes out and sows seed, and some falls on good ground, and some falls on thorny ground, and some falls on hard ground, and some falls on rocky ground. But he tells the story. He ends the sermon with the story, basically, and then he goes home, back to his house in Capernaum. And a small group of followers follow him actually all the way to his house. And they come to the house where Jesus is staying, and they say to Jesus, "Jesus, what was that? The story. We didn't get it. What did you mean?" And Jesus says to them, "Oh, you didn't get it." And they said, "No. Can you explain it to us?" And Jesus says, "Well, where's everyone else? Where are the crowds?" And they're like, "Well, I don't know. I guess they've gone home. They're in line at Luby's waiting for lunch. I don't know. They're gone." And Jesus says something that I've always found interesting. I thought it was a little harsh, but I think now I understand it. He explains the parable to them, and he says to them, "To you, I'll explain it, but not to them. To those of you who showed up, I'll explain, but not to the others." And I'm convinced that day anyone in that crowd could have followed Jesus home, but only a few of them did. Only a few of them were hungry enough to really know Jesus and understand him that they skipped lunch. So what did Jesus mean? I think he meant that there's a certain level of devotion, a certain layer of devotion that you have to have for God to really understand who God is. That at some point in time, you have to care enough to show up. If you don't care enough to get out of bed and get dressed and show up to the places where Jesus is being taught, the places where he's being preached, the places that will help you grow, if you can't even do that much, I think Jesus would say, then you don't want it bad enough. So I think there's this first layer of devotion that just says you have to be hungry enough. You have to make the effort. The rabbis used parables because parables are not easy to get always. And it forced the disciple, the student, to think about it. It forced the disciple to dig. The rabbis didn't just spoon feed their disciples. They made them work to get the information. And so I just wanted you to reflect this weekend. Where are you in your devotion level with God? What layer are you at right now in your life in your devotion to God? And I want you to reflect on the idea that it could very well be. And at some point, you may have to ask yourself, am I really hungry enough? What does my devotion look like? Am I hungry enough for God to invest his precious treasure in me? I hope you have a great weekend.